The Intergalactic Academy's xenobiology wing hummed with the controlled chaos of a dozen species learning to coexist. In Classroom 7 Beta, Instructor Jalen Cross stood before a semicircle of young predators, each one representing their species' first generation to join the galactic community. Most instructors preferred teaching herbivores. Safer, predictable. But Jalen had volunteered for this assignment, much to the bewilderment of his colleagues. Predators understand hierarchy differently, he'd explained to the Academy's headmaster, a thoughtful Quilleen whose species had evolved from herd animals. They need structure, not just rules. Today's lesson was supposed to focus on interspecies communication protocols. Instead, Jalen found himself in a staring contest with a problem. The problem had 4 legs, silver-striped fur, and far too many teeth for something barely 3 cycles old. Rex, the name the cub had chosen during orientation, was gnawing on the corner of his assigned desk with the determination of a creature that had never heard the word no. Rex, Jalen said calmly, not raising his voice. The cub's ears swiveled backward, acknowledging the human's presence, but his jaws remained locked on the desk's edge. The metallic alloy groaned under the pressure. Around the room, the other young predators watched with varying degrees of interest. A Carvish hatchling chittered nervously. A Droxian pup's tail twitched in anticipation. Jalen had seen this before, not with Rex specifically, but with predators in general. This wasn't defiance born of malice, it was a test. The cub was asking a question with his actions. Are you strong enough to lead me? Most instructors would have activated the classroom's compliance field by now, sending a harmless but uncomfortable neural pulse that discouraged unwanted behavior. It was standard protocol, effective, efficient, and entirely wrong for what Jalen was trying to build. He walked forward, his footsteps deliberate and unhurried. The human moved with the casual confidence of someone who had spent years studying predator psychology across 100 worlds. His colleagues called it reckless. Jalen called it necessary. The other species in the academy, the herbivores, the omnivores, the crystalline intelligences, they all relied on technology to enforce order. Force fields, neural dampeners, automated restraint systems. But predators? They understood something more primal. They understood presence. Jalen stopped beside Rex's desk. The cub's yellow eyes flicked toward him, still not releasing his prize. Up close, Jalen could see the juvenile's muscles trembling with effort. The slight flatten of his ears that betrayed uncertainty beneath the bravado. Without a word, Jalen raised his hand and knocked twice on the desk surface. Thunk, thunk. The sound was sharp, deliberate, cutting through the ambient noise of the classroom. Not a threat, not a command. Just a signal, I'm here. I see you. Acknowledge me. Rex's jaws loosened slightly. Jalen knocked again. Twice. Same rhythm. Same pressure. Thunk, thunk. Around the room, the other predator younglings had gone silent. They were watching now. Truly watching. Sensing something in the air that their instincts recognized even if their young minds couldn't articulate it. The cub released the desk. Slowly, as if moving through water, Rex lowered his head until his muzzle rested flat against the desk's surface. His ears remained back, submissive but not fearful. His tail, which had been lashing moments before, settled into stillness. Jalen placed his hand gently on the cub's head, between his ears. The contact lasted only a moment, long enough to convey approval, not so long as to make the young predator uncomfortable. Good, Jalen said quietly. You can listen. He returned to the front of the classroom as Rex lifted his head, the cub's eyes now tracking the instructor with newfound focus. The other students remained silent, processing what they'd witnessed. Communication, Jalen began as if nothing had happened, isn't just about words. Every species in this academy evolved to survive, and survival requires reading signals. Predators, he gestured to his students. You evolved to read the body language of prey, to notice the smallest movement, the subtlest change in posture. A Droxian pup raised her clawed hand. But you're not prey, Instructor Cross, you're a predator too. Human hunting patterns are in our databases. Jalen smiled. Exactly. Which means when I communicate with you, I'm speaking a language your instincts already understand. That knock? It wasn't random. It was a challenge and an invitation. Rex had to choose, ignore me and escalate or acknowledge me and learn. The other instructors use the compliance fields, a Karvesh hatchling observed, his translator rendering his clicks into galactic standard. They do, Jalen agreed, and those work. But they teach you to fear consequences, not to understand communication. When you leave this academy, you'll be ambassadors for your species. You'll negotiate treaties, establish trade routes, navigate complex social situations. You won't have a compliance field then. He walked back to Rex's desk, but this time the cub watched him approach with alert curiosity rather than defiance. What you will have, Jalen continued, is the ability to read a room, to understand when to push and when to yield, to recognize the signals other species send, even when they're not using words. Rex's tail swished once. A tentative gesture. Jalen knocked on the desk again. Twice. Thunk, thunk. The cub immediately placed his head down, holding the position for a 3 count before lifting his gaze to the instructor. See? Jalen addressed the class. He's learning the pattern. Soon it won't be about submission. It'll be about communication. A signal between us that means I'm paying attention. I'm ready to learn. The Droxian pup's ears perked forward. Can you teach us signals like that? Ones that work with other species? That, Jalen said, returning to the front of the room with a grin, is exactly what we're going to spend the next 6 cycles, learning. As the lesson shifted into practical exercises, students paired off to practice, reading each other's body language across species. Barriers. Jalen noticed Rex, watching him with an intensity that went beyond simple student interest. The cub had learned something today, but so had Jalen. These young predators weren't problems to be managed. They were minds hungry for structure, for understanding, for someone who could speak to their instincts while teaching them to transcend those same instincts. Later, as the students filed out, Rex paused at the doorway. The cub looked back at the desk he'd been gnawing, then at Jalen, then deliberately placed one paw forward and lowered his head in what was unmistakably a gesture of respect. Jalen knocked twice on his podium in response. The cub's tail lifted, in what might have been the predator equivalent of a smile, and he bounded out to join his classmates. Alone in the classroom, Jalen made a note in his teaching log. Rex, progressing well. Responds to pattern-based communication. Recommend continued positive reinforcement through gestural signals. Then he looked at the gnawed desk corner and added, also recommend requisitioning stronger furniture. Outside the classroom window, 100 different species moved through the academy's corridors, learning to build a civilization together. And in Classroom 7 Beta, one human instructor was teaching the galaxy's young predators that communication was the strongest force in the universe. One knock at a time.